Hey everyone, I'm just starting the live that we're doing with Carissa, JCN. Oop. So many things to do. Just trying to add her now, but it's trying to tell me that I keep introducing all of the steps. Gosh. Alright. It's really hard to type and talk at the same time. Alright, let's do it with in kids specifically, and what this can look like, how to resolve it and all of that sort of things, and yeah.
Hello.
Hey Carissa, can you hear me? No?
Instagram's doing things. I'm not sure what it's doing. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I'm trying to find somewhere to sit because I don't have my camera stand and I can't balance my phone with the earphones connected in. So I'm like, this is just a bit of a shit show. But anyway, that's okay.
Luckily I have mine set up today, so I look a little bit more professional, but
Yeah, I normally have one of those. I've got like a monkey grip stand that I can just sit it on any sort of surface, but I don't have that, and I don't think my wireless earphones like Instagram. Anyway, who
no.
cares? How are you?
Let's do it anyway. Work
Let's do
before
it
the fun.
anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
So have you jumped on and said what we're kind of here to talk about already?
Yeah, I was trying to concentrate on trying to add you, so it was like a little bit of a mess, but
Oh,
food
that's all right. Well,
intolerances versus allergies, that sort of thing, going over what that kind of
yes.
looks like.
I feel like we've got a few people on now, which is cool. So we can kind of just refresh it. So what we were doing is because it's just for everyone who's jumping on and joining. Thank you for joining. We are what is it? It's Childhood Nutrition Month. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Cool, cool, cool. I always get like I feel like everything's a tongue twister sometimes. So we're doing Childhood Nutrition Month at the JCN Clinic. So we are like a couple of us all are doing different lives and stuff, and the JCN Clinic page is going gangbusters with tips for protein and all different cool stuff. But we wanted to jump on, you and I, and chat about food intolerances in kids because I think, and it's a massive topic, so we are going to try and keep it shorter than what we could probably talk for about an hour, maybe longer, deep diving down rabbit holes with this. But I thought, well, we thought we will just keep it. We won't go through like the different ages and how it presents and things like that, but we'll just kind of talk a bit like from a general point of view about the big things that we obviously see a lot of. And then just some, besides working with a practitioner, which is always important when you're dealing with intolerances and definitely allergies, how we could help people at home to kind of start to identify some of that stuff. So do you want to hit the floor running with the difference between an intolerance and an allergy for all of our listeners who might be new to this space? And I think the only reason I thought it'd be good to differentiate that is because I feel like the two get used interchangeably a lot. When you read like different forums and things like that, sometimes I see the word intolerance used a lot where allergy should be used and vice versa. And I think it's really good that people have an understanding that there is a distinct difference between the two. But sometimes the symptoms that manifest or come up can be similar.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hit it.
So
Hit it, lady.
you've got your food allergies, which is like one kind of, I guess, more intense aspect of it, where it's that immune mediated reaction. It's kind of really quick. Your typical kind of anaphylaxis symptoms come up, so you might get like hives, a lot of that histamine picture, a bit of tightness in the throat, maybe a little bit of a swollen tongue, or it could be like actual anaphylaxis too, but that sort of reaction. Versus your intolerances, which is more of that gut, like what's going on in that gut that's causing that reaction there and how that's processing that food and that sort of thing. It does kind of look similar, but it's not that, like, with the swelling of things or that sort of reaction too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes too, and we'll definitely talk about this. God, my arm's getting sore holding my phone up. I think the other thing too that's worth talking about is sometimes the allergy-like symptoms, and we're talking about when you were saying too, like different immune-mediated responses, like a true allergy is an IgE, immune-mediated response. And I know obviously when people are doing food introductions for kids when they're first moving on to solids, like usually usually you can pick up an allergic reaction with some of the real common allergens quite quickly.
Yeah.
But it's not uncommon for allergies to develop. And it's the same with intolerances. But the thing is with intolerances is exactly right. We're looking at more gut-based reactions. We definitely have skin reactions with intolerances as well, which I think is sometimes where allergies and intolerances can get a bit kind of convoluted. But, you know, that's just how it rolls. So, but yeah, anyway, well, let's kind of get into the big ones, because I think there's some really cool things just even in the first two to four that we're going to discuss. But yeah, I wanted to start with gluten and wheat, because I think they're quite massive with kids in terms of an intolerance point of view. And I just think with the way things are going, generally these days, like we're seeing a lot more of it. Like we see a lot more adults these days, like with obviously a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Sometimes, and I know you would see this as well, like you can have mothers or grandmothers that have been diagnosed late stage in life with celiac disease, and then sometimes their kids are celiac as well, or they're gluten sensitive, but then we definitely see that flow into the next generation as well, which I think we're seeing a lot more of. So gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance. So, and same with wheat. So do you want to go through like how that sort of what like a parent could look for if they were suspecting like a gluten or a wheat intolerance?
Yeah. It's a bit hard, I feel, with like when you're first starting to notice those symptoms, because like wheat and dairy, not with the gluten and wheat, sorry, are like kind of everyday foods for a lot of kids too. So typically won't notice these symptoms until you pull it away, and then you're like, wow, that was so dramatically different. But like those changes in bowel habits as well with your constipation or diarrhea, it kind of depends on what their gut's like too. Maybe a little bit of change in behavior, complaining of a sore stomach a little, or sleep changes, sleep disturbances, like waking up, like nightmares or anything like that's a little bit more common.
Yep.
Yeah, probably the usual suspects for gluten.
Yep. Yep. I was going to say psoriasis as well.
Yeah.
Just because I know I've got
picture.
Yeah, that more autoimmune picture. Like I've got quite a few, well, not quite a few, but over the years I've had quite a few kids with psoriasis, and I think we're starting to know now, or especially in adults, that there's a massive link between celiac disease or gluten sensitivity and celiac and psoriasis. But I don't think it's as known in kids, or it's not. It's probably becoming more of a thing now, because you don't see a lot of kids with psoriasis. It definitely seems to be more of an adult thing. But I've had a few over the years, and I think again it might be a bit more common knowledge now, but I think there's probably a lot of parents that, unless they're kind of in this health and wellness space, they probably wouldn't draw the correlation between the two. And I think the other thing is that a lot of mainstream protocols for any sort of skin or allergy sort of issues with kids is to go to an allergy clinic, which is great. But if it's not an allergy and it's an intolerance, it may not get picked up. And gluten can quite often be a massive driver for some of the skin stuff with kids, especially psoriasis. And we'll talk about eczema when we talk about dairy, but gluten can definitely play a role there, or wheat, sorry, can definitely play a role there as well. So I love that you touched on behavioural and sleep changes. I think that's a really important one. And even like when we say behavioural, like general behavioural change, gluten, when it's not digested properly, or when kids, their microbiome, I'm just going to really simplify this, but for anyone listening, when there's issues with the enzymes that actually have to deal with like the gliadin and the different components of gluten and or wheat, and that it's not broken down and digested properly, it is actually really neurologically aggravating for children. So if there is a undiagnosed celiac disease, which is obviously an allergy, but a gluten intolerance, definitely from a behavioural point of view, we can see that impacting kids, and definitely, like as you mentioned as well, sleep. And I think the hardest thing for mums is, it, like you said, it's in so much food, and it is a really hard Lauren.
Yeah, did you see that comment?
Yeah. I love you, girl. It is a really hard one for parents to remove, because the thing is, like, and I know when I've worked with a lot of my clients can we just appreciate all the fishing gear in the background here, by the way, off topic. Bloody hell, like lures for days. Anyway, so when we're trying to, like, obviously the biggest thing for trying to work out if your little one, or, you know, your teenager or any child of any age has an issue with gluten, is you have to almost remove it absolutely, and you have to remove it for a good period of time. It's not like and we'll talk about dairy and lactose in a second, where you can pretty much get a pretty clear symptom picture usually within a week, sometimes, not if we're dealing with skin stuff, but from a digestive point of view. Gluten, if I'm working with mums and their kids to see if there's a gluten sensitivity, we're actually trying to look at removing it for at least 12 weeks, absolutely. And that can be freaking hard, yakka, for parents, because we have daycare, and unless your child is or school even, but unless your child is actually diagnosed with celiac disease, it does make it really hard to get everyone on board. And same with all the kids' parties and social events, right? Like, gluten's in everything. So,
and there's a lot more gluten-free options now, and like I feel like people are more aware of that dietary need, I guess.
Yeah.
But then, like, with allergies and intolerances, because people don't even really understand what the difference is, I don't know if they would take it as seriously as they should.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I do with my clients, and I'm sure you do the same, but if you want to add anything else into this, is like, depending on what's doable for them dictates what we do. So we might just remove wheat 100% for 10 to 12 weeks. And then instead of having a big focus on the other gluten containing grains like spelt or rye or barley or even oats to a degree, we'll keep them in to a degree, but we'll try and rotate with gluten-free grains. So we might do an absolute removal of wheat and a complete reduction of gluten if an absolute removal of gluten is too hard. So that's one option. Or if it is doable for 12 weeks, and I have had some of my clients just, you know, go in and talk to their daycare centres or talk to their schools and just go, look, we are seriously suspecting this. For whatever reason, and sometimes even writing a letter helps as a practitioner, and just for 12 weeks we do completely remove that. And then the idea from there is that you do want to see it reintroduced to some degree. Like, so if you're pulling a 6-year-old off gluten entirely for 12 weeks and you do actually get a resolve in some of their GIT symptoms or behavioural stuff or sleep or anything like, or skin or anything like that, you don't necessarily, you want to be working with someone, or you want to be able to at least bring some of these grains back in, especially if you're dealing with gluten as a sole wipeout. Like, I think oats are a really important and beneficial grain. If they're not intolerant to oats, then I think they're a beautiful part that can be in anyone's diet. And the same goes for like rye and barley and spelt, some of these other my arms are getting so sore, gluten grains. So so it is about a reintroduction phase as well. And I think that's where working with someone can really help if you are a bit in the dark as to how to do that, because some kids just have an issue with wheat, and it doesn't wipe out every single gluten grain. So it's really important to identify, I think, which gluten containing grains are the issue, rather than just broad brushstroke taking them all out and keeping them out forever.
Yeah, like, definitely wheat is more of the common gluten grain that kids will eat. Like, if I'm not suspecting full celiac, I will just do, or at least mainly do, the wheat, and then still allow oats and just kind of see how they go. Because everyone has that different tolerance level for gluten or wheat too. So you can test that out and do the reintroductions. But yeah.
And sometimes it's not an absolute removal moving forward too. Sometimes it's just acknowledging how much it's in, and just removing it. You know, some parents like just a complete removal and then a reintroduction, but they still majority I can't even speak majority of the time their kids might be like 60% gluten free, but they just focus more on the other beautiful whole grains that are out there, and then that's enough. So yeah,
I find that if they're not super sensitive or celiac. I have had a lot of celiac family members though, like
same
lately, especially like the last 2 weeks. I feel like it's all of my clients
clustering. Good time to chat this one over.
Yeah. And then
celiac, the gene is strong with this one.
Yeah, but the kid doesn't test, like, unless they're actually eating gluten, it's kind of hard to tell, but they don't test positive for those celiac markers.
Antibodies.
Yeah, but then half the time they're coming in and they're like, oh, well, we don't really eat gluten that much anyway because mum or dad is like celiac anyway, so it's kind of hard to picture. But then I'm like, well, let's just assume, take it out,
have a break, see if there's any improvements.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point though. Like realistically, like I feel like with autoimmune, and I think too celiac gene testing should be done as well as the antibody testing, because like you said, there are a lot of kids who may not be having a lot of gluten in their diet, or mum may be celiac and dad may not be, so they're probably not having as much gluten as other kids, and yes, they may not have celiac disease currently or yet, but you know, understanding their risk by doing some gene testing isn't such a bad idea. But anyway, that's a massive topic for another day, talking about all of that. Let's move on. So the next one is dairy intolerance and lactose intolerance. So again, a lot of gut stuff associated with that, but definitely, like, I feel like with gluten and wheat, you know, from a bowel point of view, like you can get like loose bowels or constipation, and gut cramping and things like that. But I feel like usually with dairy and lactose, and let's probably differentiate too, full dairy being casein, which is the protein in dairy, and lactose being the sugar molecule. So you can be okay with lactose-free dairy, but not lactose itself. But definitely more of that loose bowels, gas, cramping from a lactose intolerance point of view. But definitely I feel like dairy is a big one with a lot of immune dysregulation in kids. Like if I've got quite sickly little kids that, you know, obviously, and there is an age where kids are just going to be sick regardless because their immune system's building up and they're straight into daycare. But that aside, if we've got, you know, kids going to school and your mum's coming in there like, I just feel like he or she is behind the eight ball, the other kids, and lots of mucus, lots of upper respiratory stuff, maybe eczema, maybe asthma. Like I think dairy is a big one to consider for a lot of those spaces. But yeah. Do you want to add?
Oh, I just know from not my experience specifically, but my partner, he is prone to allergies. Like he gets allergies quite often, and like not saying that this is going to be a long-standing issue, but we have over time taken a lot of that dairy out of his diet. And this is an adult, so like this would be pretty similar in kids too. But he's getting a lot less of that mucus in the morning. A lot of that throat clearing has gone away. Like that allergy response that presents differently to like your hives or something like that.
Yeah.
Definitely connected with the dairy, and like even postnasal drip and that sort of thing as well. After you order a flu, remove the dairy and that kind of dries up, like it goes away.
Yeah.
Right.
What is, I don't know, and I don't know if you'll be up, I just feel like this just came to me randomly, but I do know, like, and I definitely have heard this in the naturopathic space, and it makes sense because exactly what you're talking about, but dairy even in the naturopathic world as well is known as mucus forming. Is that correct? Like I know we're always taught that studying. Yeah. But I always know like we weren't necessarily taught that from a nutrition point. Let me let the dog out. Go on. Go be free. Be free. Okay, take your time. Like we weren't necessarily taught that, like not from a nutritional point of view, like it was just more, but definitely like it was always just dairy was known as mucus forming, but it does make sense, like exactly what you're saying there. Like I know myself, even from an allergy point of view, and I don't mean like a food allergy, I mean like an environmental allergy or, you know, upper respiratory allergy. Hey,
an allergy to cat hair or something like.
Yeah, like dairy's a real trigger, and I feel like sometimes just really subtly, not really subtly, but really removing it or having a definite reduced in someone's diet, you do definitely see a calm down of that upper respiratory, like allergic rhinitis and that postnasal drip and that phlegmy sort of you know, it's a symptom picture. Hey.
Yeah, definitely. I have noticed that in quite a few people too.
Yeah. I feel like let's just touch on eczema and asthma, because I think eczema and asthma kind of do go hand in hand for in a lot of families and a lot of people. Sometimes people just have one or the other, but quite often they in a family picture, when we're looking at mum, dad and siblings, quite often it does trend together, right? So, and I do feel like, again, not isolating dairy alone, there's obviously some other things to consider when we're talking about allergies, asthma, but eczema and skin stuff more specifically. Dairy definitely can be a big game player there as well. And I think the most important thing for anyone watching this video is that if you are thinking again about removing dairy, especially from a little one's diet, like, you know, a child's diet, I would, unless you are really kind of in the know with what you're doing there, and even just replacing some of those calcium, vitamin D sort of requirements and stuff like that, I would definitely recommend working with a practitioner to work out if it's an actual lactose intolerance, if it is an actual dairy intolerance, and how strict you need to be with that, but also if that needs to be something you're going to be doing longer term, what you need to be replacing in your kids' diet there as well to make sure that they're still nutritionally kept up to speed is probably the best way to say it.
Fulfilling their RDIs. Yeah.
Filling their RDIs. So technical
like
of us.
With dairy and eczema though, when you take dairy out of their diet, obviously it gets a little bit less inflamed and it might be not as dry.
You got to do other work though.
Dry eczema too, yeah. But like the frequency of the eczema flares slows down so much, so you have a lot more time to heal that skin and kind of work with that immune system to avoid having future flare up. So you do have like obviously all your gut healing stuff as well to help with that dairy intolerance if that's what's going on. But yeah, I feel like the break time that you get from taking out dairy is enough to support that skin membrane and that gut membrane. I'm pretty sure, I might be making this up, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure in uni one time someone was talking about like the reflectiveness of those mucous membranes where your gut lining like being inflamed and all of that from the dairy intolerance is reflected in the skin and that not immune.
Oh, 100%. And the psoriasis is the same. Like that's what I think, I can't remember ages ago, but I did a chat about this and I said like we've got to stop differentiating like, you know, the gut and the skin. Well, like we obviously need to differentiate them, but just think of them as barriers as well. Like our skin is just a membrane of cells and all of this cool stuff that protects us from the outside world, but our gut protects our insides from what gets put into that gut. And the commonalities between the two are insane. So like obviously same but different is probably the best way to say it. But if you've got stuff coming through on your skin, the first place you go is your gut, like without a doubt. So,
and what's fun about that is like the things that you would typically use to heal your gut in terms of nutrients and food are the same kind of things that you would use on your skin anyway.
Yeah. Let's just quickly, while we're going on these two too, because I think we're talking a fair bit about skin issues and gut issues and things like that. But obviously sometimes removing these foods can give parents an absolute resolve in terms of symptoms and issues with their kids. But sometimes too, certain types of supplements can really be beneficial in either speeding up that process or to actually helping that process. And sometimes, like I know you would have seen this, like I have someone who would come in and they said, well, I took Joey off gluten for 8 weeks and I didn't see a heap of difference. Or maybe I saw some difference, but not enough. And I think sometimes too, like that's where working with a practitioner. I know I keep saying that, but it's not as easy and black and white sometimes when we're dealing with intolerances as it appears to be. And sometimes you may need to have them off one of these foods or both of these foods combined for a period of time, but you may also need to be doing some skin and gut, healing work. So that can, come in the forms of certain supplements, certain oils, certain probiotics and things like that at the same time to just really calm down that big inflammatory response that has been caused by that intolerance or allergy. So, yeah.
And like some of those things that we would typically use, like what do you call it? Your bone broth or whatever, depending on what their picture is as that person, like if they've got an issue with histamine, bone broth's not going to be the right choice for them. So and on the rest of their picture too.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's certain probiotics, especially single strain probiotics, they all have different uses depending on. So again, like sometimes jumping in blindly or using a big multi-strain probiotic and all of this, it may not necessarily be the answer. And I think that's working with someone who understands that can be a really good idea. Geez, we're good at talking. We've nearly done half an hour. Okay, let's do the last two quickly because I feel like we're going to chat over eggs and salicylates because they seem to be two of the other big ones. And I think eggs obviously can get broken up into egg whites and egg yolks. Quite commonly, egg yolks are less of an issue as opposed to egg whites that are more of an issue from an allergy point of view. But from an intolerance point of view, maybe same, but I'm going to say maybe just sometimes it's more eggs in general. And if you did want to, if you were suspecting that your child has an issue with eggs, and it's definitely not from an allergen point of view, but more from an intolerance point of view, definitely, again, similar gut-based symptoms like cramping, bloating, gut issues. Vomiting, I do see a lot with eggs, which I find really interesting.
Bizarre one. Do you get a lot of
Yeah,
gas with eggs too because of that
yeah,
salt?
that sulfury smelling gas. But definitely again, hey,
You can smell it like after
you,
they've gone to the toilet or done a flush.
and yeah, definitely. But sometimes too, like again, I don't know, we've covered this with gluten and dairy and all of that, but the skin rashes, like again, like I think skin's really hard sometimes because what can come across as an allergy may be an intolerance, or it may be a mild allergy, which is where sometimes too working with someone who can do allergy testing for kids is important to
Yeah.
differentiate egg whites versus egg yolks.
I'm pretty sure the food intolerance panels that we do sometimes have the difference on them.
Yeah, it depends on what panel you do. So if you do a food intolerance panel, you're quite often just looking at the IgG and IgA immunoglobulins, and then IgE, as we kind of mentioned at the start, is more your true allergy.
Yeah.
And you can do all three. Well, I think at least you used to be able to combine, so you can see if there's a true allergy response. You can, if you are suspecting an allergy to, and you don't want to see an actual, like you haven't been to an actual allergy clinic, you can do serum allergy testing for IgE against a lot of things, which I think a lot of people don't know. Like if you've got a good GP and you're like, oh, my child, I think, might be having issues with this, you can even just run blood allergy panels through a GP, which I think a lot of people don't know. They're not the be all and end all, but they do cover a lot of stuff like your dust, your pollens, your mites. I think they do gluten, aside from gluten antibodies, and maybe they do wheat, sorry. They do eggs, they do nuts, they do eggs. I think I said eggs. Anyway, so sometimes too, even as a starting point, working, just even asking your GP to run an allergy panel, and a really good one can sometimes, be a good starting point if you are suspecting or wanting to know if there's a difference between skin rashes and stuff like that from an allergy versus an intolerance. So
Yeah. And a starting point even before that, like just in general, if you're noticing those GIT symptoms or those skin rashes, is keeping a food diary of your kid and like
so
what
true.
they're eating. They're eating it because sometimes with allergies, like we did say, it's more of that immediate response. Whereas with food, sometimes the proper effects, or like the skin rashes or something, won't show up for like 72 hours. Like that's 3 days of food
Yeah.
that they triggered by.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting or the hard thing with intolerance is that they can be really hard to pinpoint, and sometimes things get the blame that aren't necessarily the blame. The other thing is too that's interesting with intolerances is that sometimes there's just one or two big drivers and the other ones aren't necessarily as problematic, but everything might seem to be reacting in a child that's hyper reactive. But if you pull out some of those bigger game players, let's just use wheat as an example, or dairy, and you get that big calm down of the inflammation and the immune system, then a lot of those other foods that we would say were like mild intolerances may not even be an issue once that inflammatory immune response has calmed down. So
Exactly.
all right, let's do our last topic, and I think we've done gluten and wheat, dairy / lactose. We've done eggs. Salicylates, I think, is another big one that we see with kids. I personally don't work with this a lot. I've worked with it maybe 3 times over 8 years. It's a massive topic, salicylates, but I did want to mention it because it is something again for kids. And salicylates are, like, for anyone who's kind of new to that word, they're food chemical sensitivities, but I don't mean chemical. Oh, actually, yeah, it can be in the sense of like actual chemicals. But like a lot of this is in just your everyday foods, like berries and skins of fruits. And it's stuff that sometimes, again, my son goes hyper 3 days after gluten. Yeah, Lawrence just said that. So that's the difference, obviously, there. Like he's got a gluten intolerance. Sorry, just jumping all over the place. If anyone just read that comment, versus actual celiac disease. So, but yeah, so salicylates are pretty hectic, like in terms of, and if you are going to go down the salicylate rabbit hole in terms of removing those from your child's diet, like salicylates are big ones for behavior, migraines, hives, itchy skin, rashes, but it is a massive group of all of your, and I'm going to say like, healthier foods, like whole foods. It's not just, so yeah. I definitely think if you're suspecting a salicylate sensitivity with your kids, like I would definitely recommend working with someone there. Like that's, yeah, it's a whole ballpark on its own.
Yeah. And then like reintroducing those foods and testing them. Like it's a
Yep.
very, very long process and hard to do alone
Yep.
without the right resources too.
Yeah.
Um,
And the other thing with salicylates is you really have to be all over your ingredients panels, any supplements. We do have to really consider environmental allergy triggers as well with salicylates, because usually if kids are salicylate sensitive or salicylate intolerant, again, like everything, they're not going to be intolerant to everything on the salicylate food list. They're going to have some big game players, but you kind of do need to remove a lot of those. But quite often their little immune system is so hyperjacked and so on,
yeah,
that they'll be reacting to their environment a lot of the times, or sometimes. So it's definitely there's a lot of gut involvement with salicylates as well. So salicylates, I did want to touch on that because it is something that I know people who work in the childhood nutrition space, and definitely the allergy and intolerance space, they do work with a lot. It's not personally something, I think in 8 years I think I've dealt with it maybe 2 or 3 times, but it's definitely worth mentioning in this space.
yeah. And I think just thinking about what like we've already talked about, I don't actually think we went over like what behavioral changes we were looking for specifically.
Mm,
But to cover it very briefly, it could be like increased anxiety or like increased irritability, like they're getting a bit angrier, a bit faster, more often, a lot of emotional outbursts,
mm.
as that, as well as that bedwetting and nightmare situation, and just like you just know, you get that feeling as a mother that your kid is not as they normally are.
Yeah.
A big component of looking into that diet deeper and getting that true sense of what's going on.
Yeah, I think, and I know we're not going to talk about it today because we've definitely already chatted for half an hour, but I think we've done well. But I think really the food intolerance space really needs to go hand in hand. Not always, but just while we're talking about behavioral stuff, the food intolerance and gut space is massive in the behavioral space with kids. I do definitely myself work with a lot of kids. I work with the parents and I end up with the children as like the next kind of layer down. And obviously I do enjoy that because I've already got a relationship with like the mum or the mum and the dad. So it's definitely a nice space to work in, but definitely the behavioral spectrum and like the autism spectrum is quite massive these days, in terms of all the different like spaces that kids can fit into there, but definitely within anything that fits into the more broad behavioral spectrum, whether we're talking about ADD, ADHD, just slight behavioral stuff. There's so much in the food intolerance space and the diet space that or as a parent, if you find a practitioner that you want to work with in that space, that can be done. I've got some friends that actually work quite extensively with Autism Australia and some of those big behavioural places, and they're kind of really amazed that diet is not brought into this a lot for kids in that space dealing with behavioural issues. It's definitely something that's a bit more of an afterthought, which I find really fascinating, because I think
Yeah.
the more we learn about the gut and digestion, and how much our neurological system is involved with our gut function, I really don't understand how the two can be so separate from each other. But anyway, mainstream will catch up a little bit there, but I also think it comes down to funding of these spaces and things like that as well. But I think even just in that behavioral space with kids, and especially when we're dealing with different degrees of autism and different behavioral things, like I know I've talked about in the clinic, but oxalates in kids with behavioral stuff and gut issues and all of that. It's really, really fascinating. Yeah, I wrote just on a side note, at the end of my degree, I actually wrote my research thesis-y thing on the removal of casein and gluten, or the protein in gluten, in the removal of kids with behavioral issues or in the autism space, to see if there was any behavioral changes. And I had piles of research that went into the gut microbiome, and this is like 10 years ago, piles of research that went into gut microbiome, the actual physiological changes in the microbes, the digestion, some of the genetic SNPs on some of the enzymes that are involved in digestion in kids with behavioral stuff, and even just gluten and dairy alone. There was some really awesome research for that in the behavioral space with kids. So yeah, just a little side note there, but big topic we could probably talk about on its own.
Oh God, it'll be even bigger once mainstream medicine kind of catches up, like in 20 years or so, as they
Yeah,
do.
I think it's definitely getting there. It's just it's such a big space, and there's just so much, yeah, there's so much information and out there for parents. And I think it's just, yeah, I feel like all parents are trying so hard to do the right thing by their kids. I genuinely, and I think mums and dads can be so stressed out by so many things, like about making the right food choices. And sometimes I think no matter where you look, someone's telling you you're doing the wrong thing. And I think that's really hard for parents when, they're all just trying to do the right thing. So sometimes it's hard when
Like
you're just so bombarded with so much.
too much information. Yeah, definitely. And I
Yeah.
feel like when with these kids, when their parents bring them in, I end up giving the parent like some stress support too, or like they're just like, oh, this is a lot of stuff to deal with on top of like everyday life. So yeah, there's a lot of components, and you have to kind of treat it as a family as well, especially when those younger kids are involved.
Yeah.
It's an interesting space for sure.
It's really, yeah, it's an exciting space. So, all right. Well, thanks for everyone who tuned in. Mickayla will save this to her feed. Is that what you're going to do?
I'm going to try. Yeah.
Mickayla's going to save this to her feed. She's the IT whiz, not me. And yeah, thanks to everyone who's listening. If you thought this was helpful, share it with people or pop it up in your feed so other people can watch it. And other than that, have a bloody fabulous Monday.
Yeah, and if you've got any questions, feel free to DM any of the JCN crew. We're all pretty active, so we'll get back to you.
Yeah, and if you are kind of interested in some of the stuff we have been posting, just jump onto the JCN Clinic Instagram page, because every month we have a different topic, but they're that's definitely got the focus of all of the topics that we're like the little cool memes and ideas and stuff. I'm a bit slack, so
there's a lot there though already. It'll
yeah,
be good
exactly. Cool. All right, love. Good to see you.
You too. I'll see you maybe next
tomorrow.
week.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right. Bye.
Bye, guys.